Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first analysis portion for The Knight and the Unicorn. This is my first novella, and while short, is actually many layered and developed a lot from start to finish. This analysis will look at the background, some of my writing processes, the character development, and some meanings that didn't crop up until later. A warning before you go on, there are a few twists, and as such, this will be a bit spoiler-heavy, so if you're interested, I would recommend reading or listening to the story first before continuing. So just some background and a little bit of a plot summary. The Knight and Unicorn is a medieval fantasy fairy tale set in the fictional land of Elendria, in what will become the region's major city if I ever decide to do another one of these novels. It follows a young man named Tristan, whose girlfriend Rosalind gets captured by an enchantress, known for killing and stealing the life energy of young women to stay immortal, and sets off to rescue her. Along the way, he meets Serena, a unicorn, who says she's the guardian of the land, and presents him a series of quests that will eventually save Rosalind from the enchantress. Tristan also meets another unicorn named Sauron, who appears and disappears mysteriously, and dispenses advice that makes Tristan question the motives and nature of his quest. To start, I chose the fairy tale style for a few reasons. First off, it had been almost 5 years since I'd last finished a novel. I self-published 3 novels between 2011 and 2012, and for the last 2, the vanity publishing really kicked in, and I became discouraged after some, what I would admit were justified bad reviews, and didn't write another one out of fear of failure. But in 2017, around June or July, the idea came into my head and just would not leave. The fairy tale mode was an easy one to work with and allowed me to pick up and go just really, really easily. It meant I got around that block of failure by starting quick and having something in progress before my bruised ego could tell me no. You establish your character's problem and quest really quickly, so there wasn't really any waiting around or trying to search for a good starting point. Secondly, was the fact that the fairy tale style allowed me to play with the format and story a little bit. I wrote a lot of notes in preparation as a sort of plot summary that allows me to touch on the major points and see what I wanted out of the work. I'd done the plot summary for what became eventually chapters 1 through 7, but soon thought Tristan dealing the final blow to Serena wasn't the best, most satisfying ending, even though that might be where the traditional fairy tale would end. It was pretty simple to start playing with it and dropping hints, and eventually Rosalind came up as a hero at the end, which I'll discuss more of later. I also loved the twist, the damsel coming to the hero's aid instead of the reverse, and felt that to be much more satisfying, and even with these notes, that was enough of an impetus to say, like, I want to get started on this, and all because of that little twist at the end there that I thought was different from what I'd seen previously. I should mention that my notes, even for a small novel like this, were rather detailed. I mean, this is 160-ish pages. It's only about 54,000 words. I think I typed up 5 pages for the main summary, a page for the characters, maybe 2, and short descriptions of each of the main 6 characters, and 2 or 3 pages for the poetry. I'm a big fan of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings series. I've read all of them. I have all 5 major books, including the Silmarillion. And from there was half of my inspiration to put the poetry in. The other half being the advice of an old friend that made it be the source of the magic in the story. 7 poems and 50 lines of poetry, I think, are included, and they were a lot of work. And all of that was sorted out in my notes first, based on where in the story they would be placed. So, like, for example, for the first one of Serena's, I decided, like, this is how the plot line goes, and this is the stuff that she needs to mention for her little prophecies about how to make Rosalind better. So all of that was sorted out before I had even written a word to the main story. It was all in the notes. I will admit poetry is not my strong suit. As much as I love it and have written some on my own, I have other videos on the channel that can attest to that fact. But I used RhymeZone a lot, both for meter to make sure that I had the same amount of syllables per line, and for rhyming. So yeah, I relied on that a whole lot. Not plugging. Notes were especially vital because nearly all the foreshadowing present was deliberate. There are 2 major twists, and both needed the proper care and clues to pull them off. Otherwise, like, you don't want it to appear like spontaneously. And I hope I drop it enough hints for both of them to kind of be there. So, like, the items Tristan gathers and both heroes later use were planned out, both with a description of what they were, as well as Sauron's little descriptions about them. Both of them were supposed to be hinting as to what they were supposed to be used for, not only then, but later on down the road. There's also smaller stuff like Serena's name evoking the siren mythology, and her violent outbursts being meant as clues that she wasn't as truthful as she seemed, and her charm had much more sinister motives. Similarly, Rosalind being a bit of a fighter and resisting Serena's curse even under duress, placed her in a position to take over Tristan's mantle when Tristan became corrupted and enthralled. I will say I loved working with Serena and all the little twists regarding her, because it was a deliberate use and subversion of something that I rather personally like. I am an adult male, and there are a few things that traditionally we're not supposed to like. The color of pink, unicorns, and very often just other pretty or cute things, being a few of them we can catch flack for. But a major genesis of Serena's character and her being the villain was because I like the idea of having a pink unicorn, but I also like the idea of going, screw you, I like what I want. Then I went and played with the fairy tale unicorn Purity, and it was fun to take that concept to make Serena demented and sociopathic and use those charms and magic against the heroes. As in addition to the fact, like, these two were the two main characters, Tristan and Rosalind, are unmarried, they're still kind of in that purity stage, so it was the exact type of target that would be used in normal Legends, and then it was nice to kind of twist that around a little bit. At the same time, Soren is genuinely helpful and good, dispensing advice and being quite noble and bearing, because I did want one genuinely heroic unicorn, and I figured, why not? So, but for the sake of kind of that sort of masculinity thing, I made him the darker blue. I made him a little bit more stronger looking. He looks a little bit more darker at first glance. And the other reason is that Serena's taken other forms, even though she's taken this one unicorn form so long. Soren, actually, I would consider the namesake unicorn of the title. I will say from the outset that Tristan was designed to be the ultimate hero of the fairy tale, following that knight in shining armor idea of the standard format. The whole story was planned with Tristan in mind. He would have fallen for Serena's charms at least a little bit regardless, but he would have eventually overcame it and gone through with this whole thing. And I would say that Tristan truly is heroic. For example, he rescues Rosalind at risk to himself, saves Alexander despite not knowing him and doing so on the fly, and fights off Serena's corruption at least for a little while and recognizes she's the enchantress of legend and the true villain. That being said, I wouldn't call Tristan the knight of the title, because while he has the right approach, and I would call him noble, there are times he's a bit haughty, a bit impulsive, and does fall under Serena's charms for a considerable amount of time, both before and after his fight with her. So there are those kind of failings that were like, I needed somebody to make up for these deficits and have somebody who really does fill that out. Cue Rosalind, who I attempted to make her somewhat Tristan's antithesis, there we go, in the comparatively short time she's active. She's more cautious than Tristan's gung-ho bravado, she's more resistant than Tristan's noble gullibility, let's put it that way, and more concentrated rather than Tristan's somewhat more distracted take. Or single-minded, I guess, whereas Rosalind's taking all the other possibilities into account. I did want to keep her as something of the fairy tale damsel, which is why she's the one being rescued initially, but I did actually want her to be somewhat more powerful than Tristan is, especially once she becomes an active player rather than just on the sidelines. So, like, for example, she's the one who listens and uses the advice of Fire, Jacobs, and Shorin, and she's the one who reveals Serena's intentions without falling for a deception, which, actually, that scene between her and Serena where she's questioning her, interrogating her, is one of my favorite scenes in the novella, by the way. And I love how, because of what Serena's done to her and Tristan, Rosalind's this one to strike the final blow. It was just the perfect combination of this sort of take that, you bitch mentality, the reversal of the knight role where the lady is the one to defeat the villain instead of the guy, and just provided way better closure than just Tristan defeating Serena. I do want to address one more point, one that was interesting because it didn't really come up until kind of late into writing the novella. The end of 2017, when I was writing the novella during my fall quarter at school, marked the end of the first year of the Trump administration. It was around the time when the term fake news really started to come into the mainstream. It was everywhere. You couldn't avoid it. I would take my laptop with me to school and check Facebook, do research for school projects, and write, and be engaged in all these family discussions of political arguments, and the term would just crop up everywhere. And without really thinking of it, I actually did make Serena and Soren's colors and attitudes over the course of the novel mildly similar to my political beliefs, if a little bit distilled and maybe even a little bit simplified. To start with, my feelings on the Republican Party are complicated, much in the same way that I've made characters respond to Serena. That being said, the fact that Serena does offer some useful information, a potentially workable but perhaps too risky solution, and hides this private darker side that grows over time is, in a nutshell, my view of the modern Republican Party. I've lived in California my whole life. I've lived in California my whole life, and even I'll admit that some Republican policies from 12 to 15 years ago have helped my family, some of whom own small businesses, and the policies actually kept them afloat for many years, especially when Republican governors are when they had their biggest booms. The problem is the modern Republican Party has taken a trickle-down economic stance that hasn't yet helped us out, and we haven't seen rises in our paychecks or tax plans. As a matter of fact, we've actually lost deductions as part of this new tax plans. This is in conjunction with many Republican politicians being openly discriminatory towards LGBT, which I would consider myself bisexual, immigrants. One of my grandmothers came from Spain, and my father, 5 generations maybe back, came from Northern Europe. There's also people of color in general, discrimination against people of color in general. My grandfather, for example, was 1/4 American Indian. And a whole host of other things that actually conflict with my religious stance as a Christian. The whole discriminatory thing being not exactly compliant with the whole love your neighbor thing of Christianity. And part of that actually even shows up in how Serena doesn't like religious objects, both the church and the symbol, being scared of it or acting like she's even hurt by it. And that's not including the whole thing about the current administration's failure to rebuke neo-Nazis and hate crimes. And it just... I'm not a political expert, but it does seem to me that a lot of this previous charm... I'll call it charm, even though I think that's not the right word of it. But it seems to blind many to these failures of humanity and empathy, which end up having an analog in how Serena's Siren Song occasionally blinds Tristan to the darker moments by kind of evoking this feel-good sort of thing. By contrast, Soren's confusing and seemingly impractical advice, at first, turning out to be somewhat legitimate and helpful, is my opinion of the current Democratic platform. Stuff that the Democratic Party has suggested has been proven time and again, either in other countries or via research, to work, to the point where these other countries are often better than us in everything but economic leverage and military might. But with many people here, it seems to fly in the face of everything we knew and once worked for us. We don't understand them because these policies, looking at the language, didn't fit with how we thought it should go. However, much like Soren ended up doing later on, I think the Democrats have been doing a better job at presenting this information and explaining it the farther along we've gotten. There's also a lot of research to back it up, and someone studying psychology, which is a hard science requiring tons of research, and with classes that have instilled the value of that research, it makes a much stronger point to me. And that's not even including the whole humanity thing that I mentioned previously. It's actually to the point that amidst a Republican family, I'd call myself a Democrat, which is a huge swing from the rest of the family. I did not go into this novel with that mindset. I will say that. It was about chapter 8 when I found that the analog was present there, which means I was about 90% of the way done before I'd noticed the colors and the political positions, kind of like the reddish colors of Serena and the bluish colors to Soren, and that the similarity was there. I actually did think about changing the colors and making Soren be the good one and Soren be the reddish one and Serena be the bluer one. But it was one of those things that the more I looked at it, the more it kind of helped bring it into the modern age, acting as a sort of criticism of each, while still saying one had more leverage, more sense, and less hypocrisy to it. Again, it's still my viewpoint. I'm not an expert. I even went back a few times and added things to further emphasize that difference in editing while never really overtly stating it. Mostly with regards to thoughts about particular stances and how one kind of doesn't seem to make sense. One seems to have a little bit something off with it and like that. But it was one of those things that grew naturally with me, never really thinking about it until it was already said and done. I will say I don't honestly know how much this may discourage some people from reading it or if people would even see or notice it, but it was something that mattered to me. Writing is one of those things that we can use these allegories to comment on society. This being something I saw happening around me, it was inevitable it would enter because of how ever-present it was. That is one of the risks you kind of take as a writer, is you have all these things from outside. There's a saying that write what you know. The problem is sometimes what we know doesn't always come in obviously, especially with this sort of thing around here. My initial thought was just to create a good story. That's why I don't really contain any true political subject matter in the story, besides some hints of what I like or don't about each party. That wasn't the focus. It just appeared into the thing. Of course, it's difficult to put any true representation of that into a medieval-style fantasy novel, but it's there, and the writing, despite being small, was big enough to fit it in. And for that matter, I don't entirely regret its presence. This is something that influenced the novel. It is something that influenced my thought process during the novel, and it would probably not be as effective if I took that out. And so there it stays. Well, that is the end of the analysis for The Knight and the Unicorn. I hope you enjoyed this little peek into the background and behind the scenes of this little novella, and I hope you understand some of the things I appreciate about it. Thank you to everyone who listened and or read along with me. Please like and comment if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you want to hear more readings. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you all next week. Take care, everyone.